Hey everyone, it's Famous Amos, and today we have a very special guest in the chill zone. His Twitter knows him as a strategist, advisor, researcher, media analyst, and more. But the OriginTrail knows him as the supply chain legend. I have none other than Mr. John Keogh. How are you doing today, John?
Fantastic. Great to be with you, Amos, and thanks for the invite.
Yes, I'm very glad that you accepted the invite. And of course, everybody is look forward to your guidance and knowledge in the supply chain industry. So I'll just, not delay any further. Let's start off with our first round of questioning, or the first question. For those who may not be aware, can you talk a little bit about yourself and what you do, maybe even some hobbies?
Sure, absolutely. Well, you can see the picture in the background here. That's not entirely a fake picture because I live less than a kilometer directly to the west of the CN Tower. So in the background there is actually my neighborhood. So when I look at my balcony, it's just on the left-hand side. So this is my neighborhood. I live right downtown Toronto. You can hear by my accent, it's some people can pick it up as either Irish or Dutch, but I was born in Ireland. And then I moved to the Netherlands and have been speaking double Dutch for 30 years or so. But yeah, so I was building high performance supply chains for 10 years across Europe, and then moved to Canada. Spent about 6 years in Asia, about 10 years in total, but 6 years living there. Moved back to Toronto last year in June. From a hobbies perspective, I've coached about 800 athletes at 10K and half marathon. So I'm also a winter runner. I'm a strict, I don't want to say vegan because that's sensitive. Okay. I'm a plant-based eater for about 10 years. I don't drink alcohol, don't smoke, no drugs. So clean living.
Okay, all right. I'm actually also, well, I was vegan for a little bit. I kind of stepped away from that a little bit, and now I'm trying to get back there. So I admire your dedication. All right, so let's move on. Let's dive into your industry experience. You have about 30 plus years of industry experience of supply chain, working in the supply chain industry. Can you speak to some of the roles you've played in that supply chain stint or period of experience, and what you've gathered over such a long career?
Yeah, no problem. So I started off in Ireland in the military for 6 years, and in that I also did a lot of military logistics. So my training was around really structured around strategy, but also around the execution. How do you deliberately plan and execute something? So I think my early military training was very good. Plus that extended into overseas duties as a United Nations peacekeeper in the Middle East in 81 and 83. And so that builds a lot of concepts around strategies, humanitarian efforts, how to coordinate logistics, and how to get it done, literally when you're talking about life-saving situations. Right. So after that, I moved over to the Netherlands, and I was building high-performance supply chains right at the very, very start of when systems integration started as a sector. So when we started to get the first networking products out there, so I was working with Digital Equipment Corporation, and we so-called invented networking, as it were, with DECnet. So I remember when we put the first networks into Italy. There was no networks in Italy. We put the first networks in Italy, and I believe we got paid through Switzerland. We put the first networks into the Kremlin. What? I mean, this is going back, and I don't think we got paid in cash. It may have been stallions and vodka. I'm not sure. But we joked about that for a long time. But I was asked then to work with some small companies to integrate them into our portfolio, because when you're a systems integrator, you sell, products from multiple companies, right? But internally within Digital Equipment Corporation, that was a little bit difficult. So I got this call one day from the VP of the networking business unit, and he said, "John, why are you offering customers choice? We tell them what they need." And I said, "No, we have to be, as you're in your business unit and you need to sell your products. There's nothing wrong with that. But we're in systems integration. We have to be independent and neutral and give the best product to the customer." So at that time, now I'm going to date myself. At the time, I was asked to go with 2 French product managers over to the Bay Area. And we met with startup companies. And my role was logistics, admin, and the finance of the supply chain, right? So my role was to meet with the small companies and integrate them into our portfolios. Now, those small companies, the first one we met with was a teeny tiny startup called Cisco.
Oh my God, no way!
Now, if I knew how to spell stock, we would not be having this conversation today. So
oh my goodness.
So we had to talk to them about product lifecycle management, how to assign part numbers, and how to integrate. And my team built the first e-commerce platform for actually ordering. We placed the first electronic orders with Cisco from the Netherlands. So we built the first e-commerce catalogs.
Wow.
And then ordered from Cisco. We built a $100 million business across Europe. But anyway, that was very exciting, very cool. I moved into the formal business unit then, moved over to Canada, took on a CIO role, Chief Information Officer in manufacturing, the head worldwide operations. I did a VP of supply chain. And then I headed up consulting at Hewlett-Packard Canada, so working with clients right across Canada, but also worldwide on the concepts around supply chain and technology. We were in a worldwide group on how to actually do that. So even though we were based in Canada, we would assist in the US and around the world. After that, I jumped into GS1. I had accepted a job at Walmart to a senior executive role at Walmart. And at the very last minute, I jumped into the GS1 and stayed in Canada. So I was in there as a senior VP.
Okay.
And heading up traceability and RFID, IoT.
And that's all under the GS1 umbrella.
Under GS1. I headed up all of consulting at HP in Canada, which went across all of the practices. Okay. And then we had, at GS1, one of the first things I was asked to do was to fix North American food traceability and recall. So 10 years ago, believe it or not, I went out to RFP to some of the market players. Now, it would be unfair for me to mention the companies' names, but they're three of the biggest players in technology. Right. And they literally didn't know how to spell cloud platforms or the concept that we wanted to move towards, which is very common now. And the issue at the time was they said, look, there's going to be all sorts of internal channel conflicts. And I said, look, I'm the customer. You have to figure that out internally. Who gets the revenue? Is it hardware? Is it software? Is it services? Or is it somebody else? So we went through that exciting journey to try to fix traceability and recall in North America. And still, frustratingly for me, 10 years later, we still haven't fixed it.
Wow. So you've been on this journey since quite literally the beginning.
I've been on the networking systems integration since the very start of the sector.
Working with the actual biggest names, because I had to get my CCNA when I got my first degree, the Cisco courses where you learn about all the networking and all of that. You've been working with the founding fathers of basically these industries since the very beginning.
Exactly. And the other companies we worked with were Cabletron, Synoptics, Wellfleet, and a few others. Many of those have been integrated and bought up, and also with Nortel in the past. But so it's been a very exciting journey. I've been working on some really big ticket Fortune 500 type projects. I've been very lucky to have incredible colleagues around the world. A lot of them are, we started off in Digital Equipment Corporation that was consumed by Compaq, and then Compaq was consumed by HP. So there's a lot of really, really brilliant people at Hewlett-Packard, and Hewlett-Packard then has spawned a lot of brilliant people into many, many other companies. So one of my, a lot of my former colleagues are now senior executives in these companies around the world. So it makes it very, very easy to really tap into what's going on, because these people, their personalities, their expertise. So I can literally call up someone in a lot of the bigger companies and say, hey, look, is this working for you or is it not working for you? So it's been an exciting journey.
Wow. Okay. So I guess I got a little bit too excited already. This is only the second question and I'm already excited. So I guess I'll slow it down and let's get back into the groove of things. So you actually on Twitter, we always follow your moves. We follow almost every tweet you make. We share, we repost everything. And you did mention something about you taking a sabbatical. So you informed us that you took the sabbatical and you have some, I guess, amazing results to share with us. What's the reasoning behind the sabbatical? And is it possible that you could share some information with us on that?
Yeah, well, if I can share my screen, I'll share some academic stuff. Now, I won't go too academic on you, but
Okay.
I'll share what I've been focused on, because I'm probably one of the only academics worldwide with a business background that's focused on transparency and trust in supply chains. So let me show you the research model that I was looking at. And this may be quite interesting for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Because it also explains the key issues that are out there. So can you see that?
Yes, it's showing perfectly.
Okay, so my deep level of research here is, if you look at the middle, the principal and the agent. So I'm looking at principal agent theory. Now, what does that all mean? It means that the principal is the buyer and the agent is the supplier. So then I'm looking at signaling theory, and I'm asking the question, this RQ1, so what are the primary methods and of signaling that's used by sellers to reduce information asymmetry with principals? So essentially the question that I'm asking there is, how do suppliers around the world put up their hand and say, I'm open for business, I have this certification, I'm halal, I'm organic, I'm kosher, my food is safe, I have these qualified people, I have machinery, I'm GFSI certified, and so on. So what I'm looking at is, how did they do that? Why do they do that? And what are the key points that they're focusing on? And the issue around there, the reason I'm looking at signaling theory is, if you think about signaling theory is about reducing information asymmetry, and for the viewers, information asymmetry is essentially when one party has more information than another. It's very, very simple. But the signaling theory is critically important. And if I reflect just one simple example on COVID, when you have politicians or executives from public health that are shoulder to shoulder up on the podium and telling us that we need to be 6 foot apart, that's bad signaling.
That's very bad.
Right?
Yes.
So signaling theory is about the signal sender,
Yes.
the signal itself, the signal receiver, and then the feedback loop. And you have to constantly adapt and adjust that. And that's really the key part in marketing as well, right? So the question I'm asking on the first one is, how did they do it and why did they do it? And I'll come back to the critical role here that I see OriginTrail playing. And then if you look at the second question I'm asking is, how does the buyer monitor the agent's ex post information to reduce information asymmetry and mitigate the risk of opportunism? Basically, what that means is, how does the buyer test the product? Do they test the quality? Do they test the safety? Do they test the authenticity of the product? And do they test for provenance? Those 4 I'm focused on primarily. And so that's when I'm reaching out to brand owners. Some of them say that if the supplier is GFSI certified, then I'm okay. I'll just accept it and I'll do random inspections or testing based on the risk, and that's fine. But the issue there is the unobservability of the supplier. In other words, if you have a supplier that's 15,000 kilometers away, you cannot observe them.
Yep.
And when you cannot observe them, then there's a chance of opportunism, or what we call moral hazard, where they could cheat. So if you submit an order for 1,000 kilos of organic mango, let's say, they may only have 500, and they may source 500 from non-organic sources and mix them all together and cross their fingers and hope that you won't test.
I see.
So opportunism is a real risk in the supply chain. And this really, if you look down the bottom on the left-hand side, ex post means after the contract is signed. And the issue is the hidden actions and hidden behaviors that may cause moral hazard. So a hidden action, a hidden behavior could be sourcing from non-trusted sources. It could be deforestation. It could be treating their staff badly, right? So there's a lot of things that are unobservable in supply chains. And then you got to figure out, how can I observe that, or how can I build more reliance or more trust into the supply chain? So one way to do that is on RQ3 here is, what information does the agent share ex post after the contract is signed, and how, why, and when? So in other words, is the information that's shared with the buyer, is that because it's a regulatory requirement? Is it mandated in the contract, or is it voluntary? So a key point here is that if it's a regulatory requirement, that's not transparency. That's disclosure for a regulatory requirement, right? That's not transparency. So we really have to see transparency in context of what's voluntarily shared. Now, there's a nuance in that I'll come back to later. And then the fourth point of this, the fourth question is, how does the principal monitor the agent? So how does the buyer monitor the supplier after the contract to mitigate the risk of opportunism? And this is where I'm going into, how can we use IoT? How can we use blockchain? And how can we use other technologies, including AI, to look for things that may occur? So if there's a drought within that country, if there's a recall within that country, these things become vital information that should be fed into a system that can give you actionable insights. So all of that wrapped up, I hope it's not too complex, but all of that wrapped up is the level of depth that I'm getting into. And if I go up to the top right here, just have one last point. The issue that you want to uncover at the start is hidden information or hidden characteristics about the business. So this is really around vendor qualification and vendor certification. So how do you qualify the vendor? And how do you make sure that they're not hiding stuff from you? Maybe they're on the brink of bankruptcy. They may have said to you that they have 15 food engineers. Well, they may only have 5, and 10 are with their partners, their business partners. Okay. They may have said that they have the latest and greatest technology. They may not have that themselves in-house. It may be a close partner. So there's a lot of hidden information and characteristics that you try to uncover. So in a nutshell, that's been my research, and wrapped around this, this year alone, over the last 8 months, I've produced I've co-authored probably about 10 academic research papers, and 2 book chapters, including GS1 on blockchain, and several others around blockchain. And I've got a really, really great one coming out hopefully soon on blockchain and the food sector. And a lot of these concepts will be built in. I try to write my academic papers in a way that's where they're consumable by business people. And I always write and create a presentation on top of that to explain some of the key concepts.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, what's that? Go ahead.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I was going to ask some questions on this, but it seems like we will be diving into that later on as well. So I think I'll just go ahead and, but yes, this is amazing. And obviously a solution to tackle these issues and resolve these issues would be even better. So we'll get into that very shortly. But of course, people on my channel are usually people who aren't very, I guess, educated in the supply chain industry. They don't know what the issues are. They don't know what these core issues are actually trying to resolve. Even though you did a very beautiful explanation, you did a very great explanation, they probably won't grasp that. No worries. For someone that's totally new to the supply chain industry, how would you explain the key issues of and concepts of traceability, transparency, and trust? Okay, so this model here is a conceptual model of the big ticket items, the theoretical frameworks that I'm looking at. Now let's put that into practice. And I'm going to show you a map of the world. And let's see if I have it here. Yeah, this one. So I've been using this slide for about 15 years. And I recommend to people to think about this for a moment, right? You're sitting down for your meal, and you got your meal in front of you. You got some salmon. I know they look like eggs, but they're potatoes. And you got some salad. Now, if you look at the yellow line, that's the potato supply chain. So we buy it from a shop. We buy it, a mall or retail. They buy it from a wholesaler or from a farmer. They may get it from a packing house, and the packing house may have graded from multiple farmers. So even at the packing house level,
You have the risk that 10 different farmers have mixed all their produce together, they're graded, and then they're sent out. So traceability up from the farm to the pack house is one issue, but then traceability out from the pack house to the wholesaler and the mall or retail is another issue. Now, when you look at this supply chain here, it's very, very much oversimplified because there's no countries, there's no borders. And the issues that we have are, of course, language, technology, different regulatory frameworks, and a whole myriad of other things that make this quite complex in order to share information. And this is the key issue. In order for this to work, you need to have the language of business. And this is why we talk about GS1 standards. And this is why, because GS1 transcends borders and it transcends languages. So if a company in, let's say, Nepal registers with GS1, registers a food product with GS1, within 24 hours, that product and that identifier, the real product identifier, is registered and it's known all over the world. So if World Customs catches that somewhere, anywhere in the world in a supply chain, they have a query tool and they can query the GS1 system and see exactly the owner of that identifier and their address and basically where that product came from. So it's embedded in that, and the language of business is critical. And this is why OriginTrail are on the money with using GS1 as the core. Now, what does all of this mean? This is the big picture. What are the things that could happen? I talked about moral hazard. I talked about opportunism. But the questions that we ask is, what species of fish is this on my plate, right? We know in Canada from recent research, I think I have a slide I'll show you on that as well, about 40% fish fraud or mislabeling, I should say, in Canada with fish. And in some cases, red snapper, it's 100% mislabeling. It's not red snapper.
That's not even, yeah.
Yeah, so is it wild or farm salmon? Because, if it's wild salmon, you may be paying a 20 or 30% premium on it, but it could be farm salmon. And of course, the scientists are still discussing whether there's nutritional differences between the two.
Yep.
So these are things that you want to verify. And how do you do that? That's the question. Is my milk diluted or adulterated? If I'm getting milk from country A, is there a risk of adulteration? Well, we know in countries like India, there's massive adulteration of milk. We know that. We know in China, from recent studies, even in the last 6 months, that there is adulteration of milk up to 30%. Is my animal feed safe? We heard about the melamine crisis a number of years ago in China, and we thought that goes away. But it's not gone away. When I was working in a laboratory in Vietnam 2 years ago, the laboratory found melamine in animal feed.
In the feed? Oh.
Yeah, in animal feed. So it hasn't gone away. These problems are still in the supply chain. And, is my food really organic? That's an issue. Now, the U.S. government, USDA, have come out with a new tool, or a new process to be able to check and validate that. But, when you get into a claim like USDA organic, and think about what I mentioned earlier with signaling, right? They claim USDA organic because it's associated with a government. It sends a very strong signal strength of trust to consumers.
Yep.
And that's very important. But when you send a strong signal of trust to consumers, that means you open yourself up to fraud. So when I was around the world, I could pick out products that are labeled USDA organic, but are not USDA organic. Yep. So what USDA has done, they actually publish a list of fake USDA organic on their website, which is great. And they're one of the only organizations that I know that actually are open about that and publish a list of fake. We should do more of that. And things like, is there heavy metal contamination in my food? Now, the scientists love to get into this one. In countries like Vietnam and India, you have groundwater contamination with naturally occurring arsenic. So, 3 years ago, I was at a conference with the US FDA, and they said, look, children under 3 years of age should not be eating rice or rice products because of the naturally occurring arsenic. They don't have the body weight to process it.
To fight that, yes.
Yeah. So these become real issues. Now, then the issue becomes, should governments be transparent about that? Do you think the Vietnamese government or the Indian government or the Thai government or the Chinese government are going to warn their citizens not to consume rice. It doesn't really happen.
Right.
It doesn't happen. So again, transparency takes on different notions in supply chains. Transparency actually bashes up against ideology in some cases, because rice is a staple in a lot of these countries. And what these governments want in, Thailand, certainly India, also Vietnam and China, they want social harmony. And the price of food is something that can disrupt social harmony. Absolutely. So you don't want to mess with the food, certainly the staples. Absolutely. But I would suggest that governments could be more transparent on the health risks that some foods have. Now, I'll just build this picture. Is my honey adulterated, or is it pure? Is there chemicals or pesticides? All of these things are going on. Is my rice and coffee really from Vietnam, right? Yep. So when I was living in Vietnam, there was this company said to me, John, I want a blockchain. And I said, why? They said, because I want to do what you said. I want to have more transparency and trust in my food chain. And I said, why? And they said, she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, what's the real thing you want to do? And she goes, well, I want to be able to sell a lot of products. And I want to take away the burden on the farmers to be able to certify and do all of this food safety testing. And I said, hang on, stop, time out. You have to build it from a foundation level up. You cannot say that I'm going to put in a blockchain and everyone will trust me worldwide.
All of a sudden, right, yeah.
You can't do that. You have to, the farmer has to make sure that the food is safe and grown properly and the claims can be verified. Then you can put it on a blockchain. You don't want it to be cheating, right? But when I hear from the locals in Vietnam, I'm not picking on Vietnam just as an example.
Right.
But, they would buy, some of the locals would buy carrots or potatoes from China. They would dampen them, roll them in the local dirt, make them look like they're local. And then if you put that on a blockchain, then they're saying, okay, the provenance is Vietnam. And here's where I bring in this very final point that I have down here. Natural sciences is what really enables transparency and trust with objective certainty in terms of the ascertainable and verifiable characteristics of the food. So when we hear the word provenance, we confuse data provenance from when the data enter the blockchain to the true scientific provenance, the carbon-13 or other methods to verify the actual provenance. We joke sometimes that, if you had milk powder, some of the technology is so good you can nearly tell which field the cow was in based on testing the milk powder. Now, we joke about that, but the science is becoming very, very specific to the real nuclear fingerprinter. And companies like Source Certain in Perth, Australia, definitely one of the leaders in this. You have companies like Swiss Decode in Geneva, who are putting in testing for milk dilution and also for rice. And other products around the world. So there are two companies that are doing a significant amount of work in this area. And they're not the only two, there are others, but there are two that really stand out. So this is the big issue. If you're looking at the supply chain, you're looking at putting in technology, you got to put it in for the right reasons. And you really have to try to solve a use case. So each one of these here would be a use case or multiple use cases.
And this kind of ties into an old well, I guess IT or database concept where, they say garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely.
If you're not putting in what's right, you're going to get flawed results.
Exactly. And I would layer on top of it that there's another key issue that we don't always get our language right. And we're all guilty of this. I'm guilty of this as well. When we we talk about digitization, but when we look at global supply chains and we look at buying from countries that are just entering the global value chains, they're really at the digitized level. Now, digitized means that they're moving from analog to digital. And we think that it's only in distant countries, but it's not. It's also in Canada and the US. We have religious minority groups in Canada and the US that are predominantly farmers. They don't use technology.
That is true.
Yeah, so we think that they're in far distant lands, but they're not. So we have it on our own doorstep here.
Wow.
And when a company says that, oh yeah, we've digitized, in some cases they're just moving from handwritten to using an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document. And then we enter the second keyword is digitalize with the A in there. So we digitize from analog to digital. That's the first step. And this is where GS1 comes in. It's critically important because GS1 has all the frameworks that helps companies to structure the data and do the data governance and the data quality and the data auditing. So GS1 in Canada, we have the most accurate data in the world in Canada. And GS1 Canada manages, I think, about 750,000 products on behalf of industry, but they audit it. So I give you an example. About 7 or 8 years ago in the UK, GS1 did research on the top 4 retailers and the top 4 manufacturers, and they found only 1% data consistency. And consistency, of course, is not accuracy, right? That's searchable. That project is called Data Crunch. So if anyone wants to look up that, and the estimated cost of the lack of synchronization between the trading partners was estimated over a 5-year period at 500 million UK pounds. So again, because they're not synchronized, this is where OriginTrail again could eliminate those issues, right?
Wow.
500 million pounds and all sorts of business issues. So people could look up that Data Crunch, fantastic project. And GS1 in Canada have data accuracy in Canada in the high 90s, which is amazing. So all of these are the issues. So we digitize from analog to digital. We digitalize business process and roles. And then digital transformation is nothing really got to do with technology. It's got to do with the vision for the customer, your vision for the business, and a culture change. It's about thinking digital. And if you look at the COVID-19 case right now, every retailer, bar none, I believe, were caught flat-footed. They didn't have their digital images, they didn't have their descriptions, and they only had a very limited amount of products online. So a big part of their issue was they didn't know how to digitalize properly. Now, digitalize, and the digital transformation wasn't there because they didn't really understand the customer. And I know COVID happened very fast, but they didn't understand it, and they didn't understand the culture change that was needed.
Yeah, I would say everyone today uses those 3 words interchangeably.
Yes.
It's so, as you break it down, obviously even me, I think about it, I'm like, I never really thought about it in that perspective. So yeah, what you're saying is totally true. I could see it being present.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
So let's take this now. So this is an example. And again, as I said, I've been using this for 15 years. And when you sit down for your meal tonight with the family, then look at what's on your plate and try to figure out where did it come from. And if it's processed and there's multiple ingredients in there, it gets much, much more complex. So if you look at some of the issues that we have, there was an oregano spot check in Australia, and you can see in the product on the right, there was less than 10% oregano in the product.
Yes.
Look at the one on the left, there was 50%. Now, what does this mean? On the one hand, you're being cheated, but what is the adulterant? What is being put in there instead? In some cases, it could be grass or hay. In other cases, the common adulterant is myrtle leaf. Well, guess what? Myrtle leaf is used in Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and it's got medicinal purposes. So you think you're getting oregano, and you could be getting something that actually has an effect on your body, medicinally.
Yeah.
So this is the risk. That's just one example, but the risks that we run are quite large. So this is why, we really have to give a virtual hug to the scientists, because they're the unsung heroes of the food industry. The guys in the white coats, they're in the laboratories that are miniaturizing the technology now and bringing it out so we can take it into the field with us. They're the real heroes here as well. And then it gets more complex when you're mincing meat from multiple countries, when you have different herbs and spices. Guaranteed, if you have herbs and spices at home, it guaranteed, 100% guarantee that some of them are seriously adulterated.
True.
Honey, we know about Honeygate, right?
Yes.
And this is very common. And of course, halal fraud is massive. We know that. We know it's massive in kosher and so on. And then what I mentioned earlier with the fish fraud, this is research from last year. 44% of the samples were mislabeled, and 100% of red snapper was mislabeled. So it's a big issue. It's a big issue. Now, if you look at what we call credence claims again are claims on products for something that's essentially it's unobservable, right? You have single practice and multiple practice. Now, a single practice is antibiotic free. Again, there's an information asymmetry between the brand owner and between the consumer. And think of my principal agents issue earlier, right? If the principal is the manufacturer, they could also be the own brand retailer, right? And they're working with a supplier around the world, and there could be 4 or 5 ingredients going into a product, and they have to verify all of those. So the work of the food industry to verify the credence claims of all the products is quite significant. And again, technology can provide a critical role in there. I'll give you an example. So what OriginTrail is doing now with laboratories, for example, is ensuring that the laboratory that has the claim or any of these credence claims here, the OriginTrail protocol can connect any of these organizations into a system so that the claim is actually coming in from the authoritative source. And this is something that your viewers should really understand. The difference between the authoritative source, whoever created that, and the custodian source. So if I'm saying my eggs are, let's pick on something halal, or let's say my product is halal. Well, the brand owner doesn't own the halal certification process. It's the Halal Association. So they're the authoritative source. The Fair Trade Association is the authoritative source. They're the ones that verify that the audit on that farm or that process has integrity and passed, right? So this is the key thing that the OriginTrail protocol can do, is connect all of these organizations into the network so that what's provided into the network has not been adjusted or changed by the brand owner or somebody else in the middle.
Wow. My mind is blown right now.
But this is why the OriginTrail protocol is so critical, because it can do all of those things. And I was just making a little bit of some jokes here, but this is pretty serious,
Yeah.
It enables transparency and trust for my food. They can tell the story of the product.
Yeah.
And so this is real stuff. Now let's get into the real juicy stuff. Before I get onto the traceability and transparency and recall, we have to also remember, and this is something I remind governments, I remind industry, because my background role over the last 10 years, I've been advising an advisor for 5 years to OECD in Paris. I've been advising World Customs, working with Interpol, advising the European Commission, APEC, ASEAN, so all of the major intergovernmental agencies. And when I talk to them about supply chains, you have to break it down. Now, when you look at the food chain, there are 5 main pillars. And so when my message then for the blockchain people out there, or people who are generally involved in technology, if you're not articulating all of these 5, don't worry about it, but don't broad brush your solution, because you really have to be specific. So in other words, food quality is very, very specific. And in food quality, you have some of these credence claims, right? Food safety is very, very specific. So I don't always like it when blockchain companies or technology companies are saying, my technology can ensure food safety. It cannot. Right. It's only analytical science that can verify food safety. Of course, it helps and it plays an important role. IoT can give you the sensors they can sense the temperature in a cold chain. They can improve the quality or keep the quality consistent. It can help, if you put in a smart contract at a receiving. And if you've captured that information during the journey, the smart contract could do an approve or reject. So technology is a key enabler, but it's the way we articulate that and the way we discuss it is important. Okay. We have to respect the role of analytical science, and we have to respect that there are a number of key standards that are in there as well. We talk about HACCP, H-A-C-C-P. We talk about TACCP, T-A-C-C-P, which is the threat analysis. And we talk about VACCP, V-A-C-C-P, which is the vulnerability assessment. And those 3, HACCP, which is the hazard analysis, TACCP, and VACCP, are protocols that are used by the industry, hopefully worldwide, and they become an important part of the defense mechanism as well. Now, what's the difference in food authenticity, defense, and security? Let me explain those. Food authenticity or food fraud is counter-criminal. So we're typically going after criminals. We want to understand criminal behavior. In a lot of cases, the criminal behavior is also the company themselves. So
Okay.
will a blockchain help?
Yep.
No, a blockchain
Yep.
won't help. Because I talk about the food chain has got two enemies, bad data and bad character. We can fix the bad data with OriginTrail protocol and GS1. We can fix the bad data, but we can never fix bad character.
Exactly.
So when companies say that we can eliminate counterfeit, no, you can't. You cannot. You have to be pragmatic and realistic. You can never eliminate bad character. It just won't happen in our lifestyle. It's not going to happen. So that's counter criminal. Food defense is something we don't talk about openly because of the sensitivity. This is counter-terrorist. So food defense strategies deal with the land you're on, the facility, the building, the employees. And this, could you have an employee who goes into work with a small little jar of poison and puts it into a 1,000-gallon drum of milk? That's going to be consumed within 2 days and people are poisoned. So food defense is very specific. The people who work on food defense are typically, you're talking about Secret Service guys, you're talking about FBI, you're talking about Homeland Security. But the people who work on food fraud and so on, that's maybe regional police. You could have FTA, of course, and USDA involved in all aspects of this, but they're very specific roles. This is why some companies, some big food companies, have actually hired ex-police officers and ex-investigators to be able to do this work. And then on food security, food security has got nothing to do with the shipment itself, the security of the shipment. This is the ongoing supply of safe, affordable, nutritious food that meets consumers' needs. So I would recommend to people to become articulate in these 5, understand the difference in those, and just briefly, I recommend to companies and governments that they need to have a horizontal So I recommend to do a vertical and a horizontal focus on that. And the reason for that is that we have a number of issues in there. So for example, on food fraud or food authenticity, we don't yet know the number of this. Some suggest it's about 10% of all food sold commercially worldwide. It's quite, and I think these numbers are quite small. But on the food security, nearly $1 trillion worldwide, according to the FAO. And then if you look at the foodborne illnesses, I think most people now would understand that, we have a significant amount of issues worldwide with 600 million people with foodborne illnesses. And this is understated, believe it or not.
Right. Yeah.
It's an estimate, but most foodborne illnesses are unreported. And with the 420,000 deaths, this is also underreported. It's much, much more guaranteed. I deal with the scientists and hang around with them all the time. We know this number is small. And if you look at the foodborne illness cost worldwide, the World Bank is suggesting just in the low to middle income countries, it's more than 100 billion annually. So that's pretty significant, right?
Yeah, that's insane.
So when we're talking then about technology, we're talking about the OriginTrail protocol. We have to address it in use cases that help to address some of these big ticket, big scary problems that we have. And so how do we get into it then? What is traceability? A lot of people confuse it with transparency, and it's very, very different. And you may get people that are saying, transparency is the same as chain of custody and it's the same as provenance. And people also make the mistake by saying we track provenance in the supply chain. You can't track provenance. Provenance is the geographic source. You can't track it because it doesn't move. Right. You can say you track the provenance of the ingredients coming into the product, but you don't track the provenance during the shipment. That's the wrong explanation. That's the wrong way to explain it. Provenance is a finite. It's a piece of land where the product came from. So it's a scientific property, and it's not the same as the data provenance when the data entered the platform. So we don't track provenance. That's traceability. And so traceability is the ability to track the history, application, and location of that which is under consideration. This is the older definition within ISO.
Okay.
And GS1, they say it's the ability to track forward the movement through specific stages of the extended supply chain and trace backwards the history application. So GS1 has just added a little bit more onto that.
Yeah.
Now, this is an important notion for people. You trace back, but you track forward. You trace back and you track forward.
Right.
And again, it's the history application and location. So when people are talking about tracking provenance, they should really simplify it, saying we're doing traceability, because that's really what it means, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chain of custody is something, again, very different. Chain of custody is like a Russian doll. You have to track every piece of information, and it actually is accumulated as you move along the supply chain. Food, you don't do that in the food chain. You would do that for explosives. Mm-hmm. You would do that for diamonds. You would do that for money and things that are critically controlled by regulation. That's when you would get into things like chain of custody. And also in the pharmaceutical supply chain, you may have extensive use of chain of custody as well. Who touched the product? And then you have that gap between the digital chain of custody and the physical chain of custody. Mm-hmm. So you may have people who are custodians of the shipment, but they're not the actual owner of it, and they have no real role in the supply chain, but they're managing part of the supply chain, and they could be part of the vulnerability in the supply chain. So chain of custody needs to match the digital with the physical to make sure that you eliminate any vulnerabilities in there. So that's what traceability is. Very, very simple. Mm-hmm. Now, transparency is different again. So there's a lot of words that we use: sincerity, clarity, truth, believability, honesty, and so on. And this is my favorite definition of, of transparency. So here, what Hofstede is, the Dutch professor, Geert-Jan Hofstede, NetChain here is a network and the supply chain together. So that's what he calls NetChain, right? Mm-hmm. So transparency of a NetChain is the extent to which all of the NetChain stakeholders have a shared understanding. Again, shared understanding, think GS1 standards, right? Mm-hmm. And they have access to, if you have information but nobody has access to it, it kind of defeats the purpose. And it's product-related information that they request. Let me give you an example here. There was a Chinese company, a CEO I was talking to, and she said, John, we did something really stupid. And I said, what did you do? She said, well, we heard this term radical transparency. And I said, oh no. I said, don't use the term radical transparency because we can't do simple transparency yet. I said, what did you do? She said, well, we wanted to give our moms, who are our buyers, trust in what we're doing. So we added a 14-page PDF with all of the laboratory results to the products. And we thought the mothers would be delighted. And I said, were they? And she said, no, we made a mistake. We put a lot of effort into it. And the feedback from the moms were, we didn't request it. We don't know what to do with it. You confused us and you scared the crap out of us.
Oh.
So the lesson there is only what's requested.
What's requested, yes.
And it's without loss, noise, delay, or distortion. Now, these are hopefully self-explanatory. And this comes from, again, the lack of interoperability in supply chains and the lack of standards. Because delay or distortion can come in there. Now, distortion can come in where the marketeers get in and start making claims for products that are not truthful or can't be backed up with analytical science. The delay can be a lack of interoperability. The noise in the system as well could also be from marketing, and the loss could be from the lack of use of standards and also the lack of interoperability. So again, you can see here that this definition, this is really what OriginTrail is about. It meets all of the components of this. It's really the glue that can help this definition come into life.
Wow.
And then what Hofstede said, and I really like this. So if information is the lifeblood of an organization, it's transparency that enables it to flow. So traceability is the actual data, it's the process. But making the data visible and sharing it, that's the transparency component.
Like veins in the human body. Component.
So even with things like a simple apple here, you may think that it's an apple. Why would we want to be transparent on that? Well, you know what? I was talking to an apple producer in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And he said, John, I love this story about transparency and trust. But he said, do you think New Zealand consumers want to know that this apple may have sat in the barrel for 6 or 8 months? And I said, absolutely. And he said, well, I don't think so. And I said, well, I think you should. And then he said, well, based on your definition, then I should tell them that I actually outsourced the growing of the apples to Portland, Oregon. I said, you mean in the US? And he goes, yes. And I said, do you tell consumers that they were grown in the US? And he said, no. I said, you should.
Wow.
So again, his beliefs were that, New Zealand consumers don't need to know that how apples are processed and where they were grown. He said, it's a kiwi apple. So I disagreed with him on that, and I gave my guidance. But I think if you're doing anything with a product, you should be able to you should tell the customer, the consumer.
Agreed.
And I did this model very, 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 very quickly. When you look at transparency, I created this little continuum. So on the one hand, from financial performance perspective, on the red line atop, you have secrets and you have the truth. So the dichotomy here is that the regulator will say to you, keep everything secret. Do not disclose information before you announce it to the market and everyone has to know at the same time. No insider trading, right? And when you do release the information, it has to be truthful. And if it's not, we will come down on you heavy, right? Mm-hmm. So on the financial reporting and disclosure, you move from secrets to the truth. In the area of products, we have opacity and we also have secrets over to full transparency on the right-hand side. Now,
I see.
If you look at what are the things that are secrets within companies, right? The IP, the intellectual property, the specification or the recipe. Coca-Cola is not going to tell you how they make the formula, right?
Right.
And many companies will, that's their secret sauce. Literally, it's the recipe and how they made the product. And in some cases, who they bought from and what those costs are, the margins they make, the R&D work that they're investing, and also the quality yields and so on. So there's a lot of things that are secrets. Now, as they develop stronger relationships with B2B partners, some are, a big portion of that will be shared with their partners. Think of the principal agent theory, right? You develop a new agent, a new supplier, yes. And that supplier is doing something for you. You may be giving them a recipe or a specification to create a new product for you, and then you will share that information with them. Untrusted suppliers, you're not going to share that information with them. So the level of trust is lower. But on the right-hand side, then you have the citizen consumer. And the citizen consumer wants information about the environment. They want to know if there was slavery involved, animal welfare, child labor, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, organizations that are out there, not-for-profits, they've done this with Nike and done it with Apple. They forced the transparency out to the market. In other words, they told the market what Apple's costs were. And Apple didn't disclose them, so that was kind of forced out to the market. So I just wanted to draw that point here, that competitiveness is often the driver of disclosure to the market. And a consumer may want more, but the fact that a consumer desires more information doesn't mean that they have a right to get it. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you have the information doesn't mean that there's an obligation to disclose it. So there's a very fine line there with what information do you share and not. Most of the time, it's around the social and economic aspects of supply chains that companies want to share. And, in the past, what was actually happening was if one of the third-party agencies, like a Greenpeace or something like that, if they found evidence where they said, what, this company, there's something going wrong in your supply chain and we want to share that with you. Mm-hmm. If the company wouldn't listen, they would go to the press, and then it's all over the press. Wow. And then the food company would deploy what I call the 4D or the 5D model. First one, deny. The second, discredit. Divert. And there's a whole number of other D's in there. So they would deploy that crisis model, the PR crisis model, the 5D model, right? But nowadays, companies like Nestle and others, they're embracing that. So if the third-party agencies, because you remember what I mentioned earlier, the unobservability of what the agent is doing, right? You cannot observe what they're doing in
Yes.
Borneo or in northern India or southern Thailand, right? So these third-party agencies act like police patrols. And those police patrols, if they gather the evidence properly, carefully, and legally, which is very important, and if they share that information with the brand owners, not keep it secret, there's no need to keep it secret, but make sure that they're aware of it and then start working on it. And this is the new level of transparency. So if firms really are committed to transparency, they have to take the good with the bad. That's the key point here. Okay. They have to be ready to expose their dirty laundry in public, and there is a lot of dirty laundry
right
in the industry. Anyway, I'll jump on to trust. So trust, there's about 140 different definitions of trust out there, and you can look at it from so many different angles. Right. Rousseau got together with a number of academics and come up with this one together. So it's a psychological state comprising of the intention to accept a vulnerability based on the positive expectations and the intentions or behaviors of another. What does that mean?
That's nice.
So let's say you go to a restaurant and you sit down in a restaurant. You're already accepting a vulnerability, which means that you're trusting that restaurant and you have a positive expectation of the intentions and behaviors of everyone in that supply chain. So if it's fish you're eating or potatoes or vegetables, essentially what you're doing is you're placing trust in that restaurant that they have done their work and ensure that every single person in all of those supply chains have worked on your behalf.
Wow.
This is why I remind organizations that in this context, trust is both an antecedent and an outcome of transparency. So which means that trust comes before transparency and also after transparency.
That's so true.
So somebody needs to take that first step. So it's not just increase transparency to increase trust. You need to have that someone taking the first step in the front end.
Okay.
So that's on those. Now, how do you put that into practice? And I'll finish on this one, and we'll go back to your questions. But on the left-hand side, these are 3 levels of transparency from Hofstede. And on the right-hand side, you have 3 levels of trust from Shapiro. And this is a model from Fentrop and Teuwissen that I've adapted a number of years ago. And I've put in the bottom line here. What's below the line is obligatory. Now, so history-based transparency, this is the classic traceability.
Okay, yep.
This is where traceability is, right? And calculus-based trust is where regulations are and contracts. But believe it or not, the basis of anything that's obligatory is either mistrust or distrust. Now, I showed you the definition of trust, right?
Yes.
And trust but verify is the little picture that I had in there. But mistrust is based on experience, where distrust is based on suspicion.
Okay.
So it's a difference.
Can you repeat that one more time for me?
Yes. Mistrust, generally, it's based on your experience.
Right.
But distrust is based on a suspicion.
Okay,
and
yes.
So if somebody is not being transparent with you, it will increase your distrust.
Correct.
If a nation is not transparent, it increases the distrust. This is why we see this in the political discourse as well. Nations that are less transparent, we have more suspicion around what's going on. That's what we call distrust. So when a government puts in a regulation, it's actually based on either mistrust or distrust. And when companies put in contracts, it's based on mistrust or distrust. And they have a risk model. They try to make sure that in the contract, that they have captured all of the potential risks and problems that they may encounter. But no contract can ever be all-inclusive for everything, right?
Right.
So this is essentially the core of my research area. So where you need to get to is you need to mature both transparency and trust at the same time and bring them up at the same time to where we get to strategic level transparency and identification-based trust. Let me explain that. Strategic-based transparency, let me use an example of Walmart. Now, I have no knowledge of this project except what's on published, but let me use it as an example.
Okay.
So let's say Walmart with their mango suppliers, they said to them, look, we want to grow the mango business in North America, and we'd like to use mangoes from your country, and we want to bring them to market. And on the identification-based trust, this is getting them to buy into the values, the norms, the intentions to bring safe, affordable, nutritious products to the market, which is what Walmart does very, very well, right? So Frankie Yanis was heading that up. He's now with the FDA, does a great job in winning the hearts and minds of the suppliers, taking away the fear. In other words, we're going to grow together. When you get to that level, that's when you can start talking about putting in technologies. Because the basis up here is trust building, and it's voluntary trust building. That's when you can put in the technology. You're not forcing the technology onto the companies. So that's when you can really get into doing sexy stuff with AI, IoT, and so on. Now, in context, blockchain is down here. This is important. It's important because blockchain is actually, believe it or not, when I say this now, when I make this statement now, people are going to scratch their heads. Blockchain is like looking in the rearview mirror at what happened in your supply chain. This is a very important statement.
Yeah.
In other words, it's capturing the transactions. You're looking behind you.
Fast. Right.
You're looking behind you. Yeah. So operations transparency, this is where you're using real-time sensors, IoT devices.
Right.
Where that's what's happening now in your supply chain. And of course, instantaneously you feed it into a blockchain. And then strategically, if you want to look at, simulations moving forward, you take the data from a blockchain, which is trusted, it's structured. You take the real-time feeds coming in from your known and your own IoT devices, and your AI can analyze that, and it can also take in from multiple other sources. I often refer to as like driving a car. Looking in your rear view mirror is critically important. The operations component is holding the steering wheel and looking out left and right, but also looking at your sensors, like your speedometer, your speed of travel. If a sensor comes up with your engine light on, that's the operations component. And then the strategic is like having a GPS device, which not only gives you the direction of travel, but it's warning that there's an accident 1 kilometer ahead. So think of that in context of building a supply chain. You want to get the balance of all of these. It's not just about blockchain. It's also about IoT. It's about AI, and it's looking into the future, taking the historical data, but taking in sources from multiple other components. It could be weather. It could, the weather. If your GPS would say to you, "There's a rain shower up ahead." There's a car accident. There's something on the road. There's a speed trap. And all of this gives you actionable insights, and your GPS could reroute you like it would with a food in transit, right? This is a quicker route to get to the market. So think about it that way. I think that metaphor of the car is often an easy way to help people to understand how all of this works together. So that's the core of my research. So let me stop at that.
If you don't mind me asking, right on this slide, before you close it off real quick, I see a lot of, basically, I see the underbelly of the OriginTrail Decentralized Network, because obviously the blockchain components is hashed, fingerprinted to the Ethereum network, but the ODN also supports the Web of Things standard, which is IoT infrastructure. You can feed all of those sensory data into the OriginTrail Decentralized Network, which can be, of course, amended by AI and machine learning and so on and so forth.
Exactly. So OriginTrail essentially is your foundation layer. And because it's not a blockchain itself per se, it's the connector between all of them as a protocol, right? Wow. So, I had a conversation just about a week ago with a North American retailer. And I said to him, look, a lot of the stuff we're doing here in Canada and around the world, you big guys, you don't need it. Small, medium enterprises need you need the technology. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, we may be a big retailer, but we have 30 different applications between our customer and our forecasting tools. He said, we're all over the place, and some of them are held together with sellotape. So he said, when you look at the outside of our company, it may seem that based on our brand that we have everything together, but big companies struggle. And he said, especially when we get into things like acquisitions.
Yeah.
So again, think about the OriginTrail protocol as an enabler of pre-acquisition and post-acquisition. it can help them share structured information, right?
Right. All right.
And it can help with the transparency and trust going out to the authoritative sources of the data. This is so important for people to understand that, because the protocol essentially could be the foundation layer of the future supply chain.
Okay, all right. Mine equal blown. I'm just gonna put the axe right there. We're gonna get back into all these juicy details. I guess we can start moving forward a little bit with more of questions as it relates to the interview.
Yeah.
One thing I did notice, I didn't know if did you want to keep your screen sharing? Did you have anything else you plan to share?
I do. I have a few more slides that I want to share with you later. But...
Okay, all right. So of course you had been made the chairman of the Trace Alliance. So
Yes.
I wanted to ask, are you still serving as chairman, and can you talk about the Trace Alliance and how that has been a change of pace for you? As you know, you have been working with some of the biggest names since the beginning of time, Cisco. I can't fanboy enough. So, yeah, how has that been?
Well, no, I'm not currently serving. I finished last year, first quarter of last year, and that was due to my academic research. It was great to help them along. And why did I help them in the first place? Because they're a not-for-profit, they're independent, they're neutral, and it's open source. It ticked all of my boxes, but the most important box that I ticked, I actually interviewed the executives and found an incredible level of experience, even though they were quite young, but a great level of experience and a great appetite for understanding the core things that really make a difference in the industry. So, and then based on my experience with them, the integrity level of them is just incredible. I mean, they're so easy to work with. They're so professional. And, you know, while I'm not involved and haven't been involved, they're doing a great job. And I think they've matured the Trace Alliance now to the next level of integration with some big partners like BSI, for example. And I was actually at the inaugural kickoff. In fact, I was representing OriginTrail at the kickoff meeting with BSI in Singapore. I think it was January 2019. Yeah. I was living in Vietnam at the time, so I did them a favor and jumped down to coordinate that and do that presentation. So BSI are incredible, fantastic organization. Okay. If you look at there are many partners in there, of course, in Trace Alliance, and many of them have really good use cases. But what BSI brings is global scale and scope, and the ability to dig deep into use cases and then make them happen with some of their core members worldwide. So I expect, again, I have no knowledge on this personally, but I expect this to reap enormous benefits for both OriginTrail and for BSI and for their mutual customers moving forward.
Okay. All right. Well, can you also, when you were serving as chairman, I just want to, how did it feel? Like, was it a pleasant experience? Well, I know you spoke about working with the team and they were very, they had integrity, but as it relates to coordinating all the events within the Trace Alliance or whatever may have been, was that, how was that experience?
They made it very easy for me. It's, they're quick learners. The team are great. Like you have Anna in the team and she was helping to drive and coordinate this. Some of the other members have moved on, but the core of it, which is really, it's around, they have a myopic focus on their customers and also a great respect for the business partners. So when they're having conversations, and we ran a competition, when I was there, we ran a competition within Trace Alliance, and that was very exciting because you had companies presenting their use cases. We were voting on those, evaluating those, and you had people from all over the world with some really unique use cases. It was fantastic to see that. So they've gone from strength to strength, and it's always difficult building a sort of consortium like that. Okay. But I think we started off on a good footpath, and I think they're on a road to success right now.
Okay, all right. So obviously, OriginTrail and the Trace Alliance are focusing on revolutionizing the global supply chain, as you just spoke about. There's a lot of issues, that we have to deal with: bad actors, good actors, everybody. So we saw that the FDA is ready to leverage blockchain technologies, or may also be centralized technologies, not just blockchain technologies, to revolutionize the American food supply chain. Do you think that the OriginTrail Decentralized Network can facilitate the needs of the FDA?
Absolutely. Not only the FDA, but also the EU, Canada. We're looking in Canada right now at an ecosystem. I think we'll come to it in a minute, but from the US perspective, absolutely. You know, the FDA, Frank Yanis, met recently with GS1. They've 100% behind the standards. Now, governments can never endorse something. They can never say that we actually endorse. They can't be prescriptive. But we know, and Frank Yanis, when he was at Walmart, Frank and I are good friends from the past, and we both struggle with the one up, one down concept of traceability. And Frank would also say that one up, one down is holding us back. So regulations are holding us back. So the current notion of moving forward is actually very similar to the model I just showed with the 3 levels of transparency and trust. Because in that model, they talk about blockchain, IoT, AI, machine learning, but also the analytical science. So everything I presented today or showed today are actually components of what the FDA are looking at. And so could OriginTrail, the ODM, play an important role? Absolutely.
Yeah.
It could play a critical role. Again, because it can connect blockchain to blockchain and blockchain to legacy. It takes away a lot of the key issues that are in there. So absolutely.
Which, to further bolster your point, as I reviewed Frank's fireside chats from 2019, he specifically highlighted that there is an issue where people they prefer to not have all the data on these or the American food supply chain running on a proprietary, isolated enterprise system, and he saw very strong use case with the sharing of public and private data as it relates to blockchain and so on and so forth. So I do understand and agree with you. So over your years of working with, supply chain industry, have you seen, what is the most unique use case that you've seen come across for the OriginTrail Decentralized Network?
Well, I would say, again, if we look at the food chain in particular, the part that I'm the most excited about is the end-to-end capability of it. So to be able to go into the laboratories and take the information from the laboratory and place it in as a record into the system or attach it to a batch. And the reason I love that is because it enhances the integrity significantly, because we know that nobody else has messed with that document. So if we're claiming that the product is, let's say, organic, and that has come in directly, then we know that if there is an issue later down the supply chain, that we can go back to the issuer of the certificate and say, now we can do traceability back to where the problem is, because the physical shipment doesn't match the documentation. And the other part of that is what we were doing with when I was part of the Trace Alliance, and this project I believe is now still is starting to kick off again. It's using GS1 standards in a laboratory. And I was talking to a CEO of a laboratory last week who's really interested in doing this, where you use the GS1 asset identifiers on all of the technology in there. There, the mass spectrometers are like big, fax machines or big printers, right? So you give them an asset identifier using the GS1 system. The test protocols you use now, the protocols that you test on a product will vary enormously. So, but when you do capture a test, it's like a bill of materials. You can capture that with a serialized identifier using the GS1 system. You can actually capture the scientist using an anonymous serialized identifier. And then the output document, you can serialize that as well. And the samples that come in, normally you have three samples, one for the laboratory, one for the customer, and one for the buyer, or one for the seller, I should say. So, and those three need to be serialized. So then when we talk about traceability of the product and recall of the product, one of the big issues that we miss that the ODN can actually help enable is to do the rapid trace back to where it was tested. Who tested it? What machine? What protocol? Where is the sample? To rapidly retrieve the sample and do another test on that sample, or submit it to the regulatory authorities to prove that the test was done on that sample, because, to eliminate cheating. So that's the part that's very exciting. And their relationship with BSI and with another laboratory that I'm working with now, I'm going to reintroduce them. That's something that I'm really excited about, because that's the part that's missing.
Okay. All right. For the sake of time, it may seem like I'm burning through questions, but I don't want to take you too long, and I don't know what you have planned. So
I'm okay time-wise, yeah.
Okay, all right. So in a tweet, you mentioned that Canada might be making some changes to their supply chain, their digital ecosystems. Is that COVID related? And as someone who's been a part of the industry, what have you noticed that has been changed to make supply chains more resilient and so on and so forth?
Let me share my slides again. This is the issue of resilience. So in Canada, yes, I was asked to be on a think tank earlier in the year to try to address some of the COVID issues. Now, without going into all of the issues, we know that industry were unprepared. We know society was unprepared. Governments were unprepared. So it's not a blame game per se. But when we take a step back and we look at how do we build resilience in our supply chains, we have to look at what the food chain is like. And this is a model here from Shift.
Wow.
And so when you look at building resilience on the left-hand side, I advocate for systems thinking. So yes, we're looking at Canada and we're taking a systems approach, and we're looking at how can we architect the future digital ecosystem within Canada, and what technologies could be part of that. Now, one of the key components that's missing, where I want to introduce the OriginTrail protocol for review, not that it's guaranteed, but for review, is the government is saying that we need to have open source, check the box. We need to have interoperability, check the box. We need to have it standards-based, check the box. So while we have a multitude of Canadian companies, technology companies trying to solve a Canadian problem, we don't have a Canadian protocol that can help connect it all together. So again, looking at resilience, looking at the complexities that we have here, right?
Yes.
A shock can enter the system from any side. Geopolitical risk, it could be climate change, it could be food security, it could be energy side, it could be on the technology side. So shock can enter through many, many different areas. And we got to look at the different roles that the different parties play. Now everybody knows how important the government is, right? For regulations, for relaxing regulations. Do you know what the government did in Canada and many other countries? They actually relaxed the labeling laws so that you could source products from different countries, like in Canada, that you could source a product from the US if it was critical, with only English. Now, it's not a product that you would consume, like a hand sanitizer, for example. So if we have a shortage, you can take it in only English, because in Canada, it's mandated English and French. Now, our colleagues in Quebec didn't like that and actually complained a lot about it, but sometimes you have to make decisions like that. Governments have also made decisions that companies can change out or swap out an ingredient if it doesn't have any allergic implications for a consumer or safety issue for a consumer. That makes sense. So they can replace an ingredient. It could be a source of sugar, for example. There are many, many different alternatives. Or it could be to leave out an ingredient in a product without formally changing the labeling. So the government role is very important, but how do you manage that? Again, if you use the OriginTrail protocol, you can actually capture the change so that when the product is going out to the market, you have the information documented in your system, so that in 3 months' time, that product does not come back in as a recall because it's unsafe. You can actually identify that, no, this was a waiver. We have a waiver for that product to legally be sold in this country, and it deviates from this. So again, you need a system to be able to manage that, and this is where the OT platform can actually help a lot. On the consumer side, we saw a lot of confusion with the consumers. We knew prior to COVID, consumers wanted more transparency on where their food came from and the sources. But the biggest issue during COVID was this one. We didn't have our end-to-end supply chain linked up, and this is what we're working on in Canada.
Okay.
In other words, the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing.
Right.
And when we had the massive demand spike on the right-hand side, By the time that got through the system, it was too late. We were interpreting our supply chains by looking at pictures online and looking at news reports. So the information flow should be instantaneous, but it was not. So this essentially is what Canada is trying to solve. How can we fix this problem? And how can we also connect it all together so that we have interoperability between even the smallest farmer and local restaurants, and between the smallest farmer and the biggest food companies in Canada, so we're not wasting food.
Wow.
And we're not plowing the food back into the soil, right? So these are the big ticket issues, but the number one issue in all of this, interoperability and the connectivity of the supply chain. We didn't have that, and we need to have that resilience end-to-end. This is why I'm saying that the OriginTrail platform could be crucial in all of this. In fact, I actually had this built in there. It could power the future ecosystems, and I have a 5D model here.
The 5Ds.
This is a different 5D, but
right.
It's the digitization, again, moving from the analog to digital. Democratization, which is the accessibility, so making it affordable. The digitalization, which is the process and the role. It's not good enough if we just digitalize. We have to digitalize as well. And then when you get into the digitalization, that's when you're talking about orchestrating processes between companies. Remember what Hofstadter said? Without loss, noise, delay, or distortion.
Yes.
This is what's embedded in number 3, digitalization, right?
Yes.
And then the decentralization is a key component, so you're not dependent on one big platform. And of course, the disintermediation as well, which is getting away from the big guys. And there are antitrust issues in Canada now with one of the big e-commerce players, which is going to expose some of the business practices that are not favorable. So this is my 5D model: digitization, democratization, digitalization, decentralization, and disintermediation. And the OT platform can play a crucial role in that.
So I don't mean to pick on any or bring up any particular cryptocurrency project, but when we speak about, people usually reference Vechain when someone says OriginTrail. But clearly OriginTrail has a completely open and decentralized infrastructure. Meanwhile, some other projects, be that Vechain or whatever, any other project, may have more of a data siloed infrastructure. So do you see a place for projects or those two stark differences, a place for data siloed blockchain technologies, siloed blockchain technologies, and a place for completely open and decentralized technologies?
Absolutely. Again, not to name names, but there are a number of issues out in the market. And a lot of these solution providers have the approach that it's GS1 or us. It's not that. It should be GS1 and us. And similarly, they have the approach, it's OriginTrail or us. And it should be the other way around. It should be OriginTrail and us. So that's the opportunity. It should be, in fact, GS1 plus OriginTrail plus X blockchain or X legacy system.
So you feel that's a whole ecosystem as opposed to one particular project that will rule the world.
Exactly, yeah. So I think look at GS1 as a foundation layer. Look at the next layer on top of that, the data layer as the OriginTrail protocol, and then the specific blockchains with their use cases can sit on top of that.
Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. That was just popped into my head as we were talking, and I saw the 4th D, decentralization. I'm like, I know that is really the bread and butter that people highlight as it relates to the OriginTrail technologies. So I wanted to get your perspective on that. All right. So let's move on to the next question. You mentioned that you've been receiving calls. You had like 3 calls last week or something like that with companies calling you to onboard new technologies to help with the issues that are taking place. Has there been a sharp rise in demand for these revolutionary type technologies from your perspective?
I would say yes, and I think again, COVID-19 has raised the issue of interoperability and digitalization of the food chain in particular, but not only the food chain. It goes into all the PPE, so medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and so on. So not just the food chain, but right across the different commodities,
right.
where protocols like OriginTrail and the GS1 standards are critical. So in the context of Canada, again, the government is calling for open source. They don't want to have proprietary platforms. And if they did or do, they want to be able to ensure there's interoperability between them, right? So this is the constant dilemma that you have when you're dealing with projects that are either government funded or government supported, is how could you work within an ecosystem? And there are several. There's one AI company that I work with out west, or used to work with, and the CEO will say to you, we have to work with other technology companies. We cannot work on our own in a silo. And I think that was great. There's another AI company who are always, and actually, in fact, we're known to be silos. And last Friday on the call, when we were discussing this stuff, he said, I'm fully open to open source technologies and integration with other platforms.
Whoa.
And he said, I'll make the statement that I don't want to own or control all the data. So yes, I do see a shift in sentiment. I don't think it's driven by economic concerns. I think it's driven by the realization that we just all have to put on our big boy pants, and we have to be able to interoperate. No company is going to dominate here, and no single platform is going to own the market.
Okay. You will be hosting multiple talk shows, and you have a YouTube channel. I've been following your content, so I have a lot of other OriginTrail community members. Where can we see these, upcoming events, and how can folks get in contact with you? I know I reached out to you on Twitter. Is there any more solid way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, when I took a sabbatical from social media for 8 months from Twitter, and I took 4 months from LinkedIn. So I'm not on any other platform. So I just do those two. So I'm just back on Twitter now for the last week or so. And LinkedIn is an area where I share information. And of course, I share on YouTube. But I started this process in 2019, so long before COVID, where I interviewed 10 CEOs. I call it the Future of Food 10 by 10. So I interviewed 10 CEOs for 10 minutes to get their perspectives on what's happening in the food chain and the challenges, the opportunities. And then I did 10 professors. And this year I did 10 more CEOs, again, same month in June this year. And now I'm doing 10 experts. And because I missed Thomas, the CEO of OriginTrail, in the CEO one, we couldn't schedule in time. I've asked him to be part of the experts. So I will interview him in the next week or so.
Oh, nice.
For nice. 10 minutes. And I'm going to ask him, with his expertise, what are the key challenges and opportunities in the food chain, and get his perspectives. But I'm also talking to people who are in sustainability. I'm talking to people who are dealing in the area of auditing, food quality, and a few other areas in food science as well. And I try to get a balance, a gender balance around the world and different cultures to get a good flavor of what's happening around the world, not just in one country or two countries. So that's working fine. After this, I will do another series on specific on food fraud. And we'll do another one specific on, it could be on GS1 or it could be another topic. But in the coming week, I will be publishing a document and a short video on something that's very, very important. And that's product identification. So, when you have the barcode on the product, many companies out there will complain and whine and say, oh, the GS1 barcode, the 1D barcode doesn't do this, doesn't do that. Well, hang on, people. It's 40 years old. It was never intended to do that.
Right.
They're complaining about, my car can't fly to Montreal. The car is not intended to fly to Montreal. It's a silly argument because it's fitness for purpose, right? So, right. But anyway, a key point is product identifier. GS1 is assigned by ISO in a standard called 15459, and the variants are 1 through 9. GS1 is assigned by ISO as the only issuing agency worldwide to issue unique identifiers to products and assets in supply chains. Everything that begins with a number from 0 to 9. And as part of that role, they have to be a not-for-profit. They have to have rules, so standards in place, and they have to manage to make sure that there are no collisions in cyberspace. So they have that very, very important role. And digital, or the GS1 system is also a decentralized system, by the way. It's like a federation. So if one country goes off the grid for whatever reason, the whole system continues working. So it's very, very robust.
Ah, I see.
But it was never intended for many purposes that people are complaining about now or comparing it to. But now you have the digital link where you can actually connect the barcode to a website. And of course, you have marketing identifiers that are in QR codes, or you may have a serialized identifier in a QR code or a hologram that's for authentication purposes. They are not product identifiers. They are marketing identifiers or authentication identifiers. The product identification always remains the GS1 ID. It never changes. Never changes. So what I'm going to be doing is articulating that, not on behalf of GS1, just as an independent reviewer, but I'll have one of the chief architects from GS1 as my co-author on that paper.
Wow. Okay.
And we'll simplify and clarify, and hopefully we'll help organizations, because I don't want to go out and tell people you're wrong. I want to just educate them on the right way, and the right way, the language and how we can call things. Like I mentioned earlier, data provenance versus scientific provenance. That's education process, right? What is the difference between traceability and transparency? That's just education. And of course, the difference between digitalize, and digital transformation.
Right.
People to understand, then we bring everybody up to a shared level of understanding. And then, then I think we'll be a happier bunch out in the marketplace. There are a lot of really great people. There's a lot of great technology companies. And there's some that are brilliant, but they make a few small little mistakes in the language they use in marketing or how they explain stuff. And we can fix that. They're not big issues, but they're important ones.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all I've had today. I had an amazing time chatting with you. I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to put into the end. I wanted to save some time for you here to just go ahead and speak about anything that you really want to say.
Oh, I would say there's one thing that's really near and dear to my heart is around this term social distancing. Now, we know where this comes from. We know the academic where it came from. Social distancing means physical distancing of 6 feet. I don't like the term social distancing because people misinterpreted that as, and it's not translatable in many languages, but social distancing can be misinterpreted to stay away from your family and friends.
Right,
yes.
Yeah.
So we actually need social contact now more than ever, albeit with physical distancing. So it means physical distancing. The Canadian government used that term physical distancing, as do some other pockets around the world. So I would recommend people use that term physical distancing and try to recover their social networks, albeit with physical distancing. Because mental health is a significant issue right now. So I would say share the love. Reach out to someone in your network, ask how they're doing. Mental health is a big, big issue right now. There are a lot of people that are struggling financially, family-wise, and in a lot of other areas. And I think we have still to get into the real turbulence of COVID-19 and the impact on people. So I would say share the love, be kind to people, the people who are bringing the food to market and products. Tell them, just say thanks, just say well done, thank you for doing what you're doing. And I think that if we reach out to someone in our network, someone that we haven't spoken to in a while, and just ask them, how are you doing? Do you need to chat? Do you need to talk? Then we just, I think we'll be in good shape when we exit this crisis.
And well, speaking of reaching out, you can reach out to John on Twitter, which you will find in the link in the description down below. You'll also find his YouTube channel, and I'll probably link to a few of the work that he's done as well. John, thank you for joining me in the Chill Zone. Thanks to viewers for being here, and I hope you have a great one, John.
Thanks, all the best. Take care, and good luck to everyone out there in the cyber world. Stay safe.